This is the second historical kind of note which we have in this course. First was the history of development of accelerators. This is not historical, but more of an exposure idea where what are the major accelerator facilities currently in operation worldwide. It is not a comprehensive kind of list, but rather indicative. Different types of facilities are covered. The idea is to have an exposure on the kind of size which these facilities reach and what kind of physics gets done in each of them. We'll be looking at that. Okay. So let us look at mega accelerator facilities worldwide. The first mega accelerator facility which we are going to look at is CERN. CERN stands for European Council for Nuclear Research, but it is in French. That is why it is CERN. This is the French name. It is located in Switzerland, but partly the largest ring, that is the Large Hadron Collider, actually partly comes over France as well. It was established in 1954. As mentioned already, it is a cross-border facility between Switzerland and France. Another important thing to note about CERN, it is the birthplace of the WWW, that is our internet. Internet started off as an exercise within CERN for communication among the physicists and providing information to all the physicists in CERN. And then the same idea got expanded on a larger scale, and that is how we got the internet. So that is just another example of how something which is created for utility within a scientific setting can actually benefit humanity on a large scale. Nowadays, at least current generation cannot think of living without internet. It is almost become like essential commodity. So all that started in Sun. In addition, of course, there were two Nobel Prizes for the work done at Sun, and more. I mean, um, two were awarded for people who worked at Sun, and in addition, there were other Nobel Prizes which are awarded because of the work which was done at Sun. Example, Higgs boson was confirmed by CERN, and the Nobel Prize was awarded to the theoreticians who had predicted this. Okay. So these are just a few highlights about CERN, and we'll have a look at the facilities which make up this particular accelerator complex. Before that, just to give you a feel for some numbers, CERN has 2,500 permanent employees who work there continuously. Apart from that, they have 5 times larger force of visiting scientists. So 12,500 visiting scientists. Some of them are roughly around 20-30% of them would be at CERN at any given time, sometimes larger number also. Okay. Uh, and they are all continuously working collaboratively. So you can see the enormity of the project. These 12,500 visiting scientists are from more than 600 universities worldwide. The annual investment which the European Union pours into CERN is in the region after conversion. And these are figures from 2-3 years back. So maybe this figure will be changed in rupees. The investment in euro would probably remain the same, but in rupees it may change. But around 7,000 crore, in thousands of crores of rupees, in the limit of around 10,000 crore. That is the budget for just that accelerator complex. This includes everything from salaries to power costs, everything. Okay? Maintenance and so on. Earlier, the largest tunnel in CERN, which runs through Switzerland and France, which we talked about, it contained the accelerator called the Large Electron Positron Collider. And the design of the Large Electron Positron Collider basically consisted of more than 5,000 bending magnets and more than 120 RF cavities for reacceleration of the beam. Uh, After that, in around 2000s, early 2000s, the LEP was decommissioned, and they used the same tunnel to house a very different accelerator, which is called the Large Hadron Collider. So earlier they operated a Large Electron Positron Collider in that tunnel, decommissioned it, dismantled it, remove everything, and then again put a new accelerator in its place, which is the Large Hadron Collider, which has a center of mass energy of 14 TeV, which means that it is a collider with equal energy beams of 7 TeV each for proton beam. And this started operation in 2010. So hardly we have had 10, 11 years of operation, and that also in 2018 it was shut down for some kind of uh, no, the machine has been operating since earlier. The 14 TeV collisions were achieved in 2010. Let me correct myself. The machine has been around for longer, but they achieved this 14 TeV, which is the commissioned energy in 2010, and it has been continuously producing this data. And currently in 2018, it was closed down for some upgrades, which we'll talk about at a later stage. Okay, it is basically a luminosity upgrade, which will help you to see even lower cross-section processes, to study whether there is some experimental evidence is clear experimental evidence is beyond the standard model. This is the aim currently, the physics aim which is they are working. All right, more to our conceptual understanding. What are the different parts of this accelerator facility? Let us try to understand this diagram as clearly as we can. Let us start with, on the left you can see there is a legend which talks about the proton beam, which is in blue color. Okay. So what kind of physics do people do with the proton beam? There is a proton source and a proton linac which starts around here. You can see near the left bottom, linac 2. The proton beam starts. There is a booster ring over here, which is a synchrotron, a small synchrotron called the proton booster. And it can recirculate here and gain more energy. After that, there is a series of experiments which are mainly for atomic physics, etc., which can directly, the proton beam can be extracted and used for that. If not, then it can be pushed into the next ring, which is called the proton synchrotron. The booster is called the PSB, or proton synchrotron booster. Then you have a larger synchrotron. So LINAC gives some energy, then the booster increases that energy at a certain limit, then the proton synchrotron takes over, increases the energy even further. And once that is done, that proton beam can either be used directly for some experiments at the kind of energies it gains at the proton synchrotron, or that beam can be sent forward for a variety of other experiments. One of the experiments for which it can go is, it can go and hit this target, which is a neutron target. So the protons, energetic protons, come and hit the target and produce large number of neutrons. So you can see yellow color arrow indicates neutrons, and then those neutrons can be used for further experimentation. This is one of the methods of producing highly directional and highly energetic neutron beams. This is to answer partially the question which was asked last time, that when a highly energetic, highly monoenergetic and highly energetic proton beam comes and strikes a neutron target, you produce neutrons of roughly the same energy distribution, and they can be used for certain experiments. Okay? That is one part. Another experiment which is done is, the proton beam comes and impinges on what is called a different target, which produces antiprotons. So you can see light blue arrow indicates antiprotons, And so the protons come and strike the target, antiprotons are produced. You have already actually done this problem in class, that how to produce antiprotons from protons and what is the minimum energy you require for doing that, etc. And the antiprotons, once they are produced, can actually be stored in a ring called the antiproton decelerator, which is a decelerating ring, which means that what you are trying to do is uh, make the particle arrive at the RF station at exactly the negative half cycle phase, so that each time it passes through a RF cavity, it will lose certain amount of energy. The purpose of decelerating the electrons is you can study antiprotons at very, very low energies. You can do a variety of experiments, and they used to do a lot of this at one time. Right now, they are not trying to do much of that, but the antiproton decelerator at one time was one of the most important uh, rings as part of the CERN complex. Another interesting development which took place there, since antiproton beams are known to be unstable, because the moment they encounter any kind of matter, even residual gas in the beam line, they will immediately uh, annihilate. So the storage of antiprotons was taken care of by continuously actually cooling the beam. By cooling, what you mean is ensuring that its phase volume was reduced. And certain technologies were developed for this purpose, which actually work against Liouville's theorem. That is, you actually make the beam spread in momentum slightly smaller, and there are techniques which were invented for this. The process used in the antiproton decelerator was a process called stochastic cooling. We'll be looking at this at a later stage in the course, but I just want you to just know that the process of stochastic cooling was invented uh, specifically at the antiproton decelerator, which enabled people to store antiprotons long enough to study them. You can also do proton antiproton collisions by taking antiprotons, storing them in the ring, and once you have large number of antiprotons, you inject a equivalent proton bunch from which is coming from the proton synchrotron, and they can collide. This is already a schematic diagram, but even in the schematic, you can see that there are a lot of curved lines and branches. All of this simply means that there will be a bending magnet or a multiple direction bending magnet, which is called a switching magnet sometimes. Those kind of things will be present along the beam line. Of course, goes without saying that there will be regular quadrupole magnet arrangements for keeping on focusing the beam. Otherwise, at some stage, it will defocus. Okay, these are just additional things which you should keep in mind, that whenever you are shown a ring, it actually means several bending magnets and interspaced with focusing magnets to focus the beam. Another type of experiment which can be done with the proton beam is to take it to the next ring, which is the super proton synchrotron. And in the super proton synchrotron, it undergoes even larger, it gains even larger energy. And from the super proton synchrotron, after accelerating, there is another experimental area where that energy beam can be dumped and some experiments can be done. It all depends on what kind of energies you need. If you are happy with very low energies which are achieved by proton synchrotron booster, then there is this isoled series of experiments which can happen. Then if you want to increase the energy further, there is another area of experiments where several experiments can be set up here and can be performed with energy beam of that particular energy. Then after passing through the proton synchrotron, there is another series of experiments like neutron TOF, antiprotons, or it can be sent further to super proton synchrotron. After acceleration in super proton synchrotron, there are two experimental areas where the beam can be delivered. So different people or different groups can set up their experiments in some of these places, and whenever the beam is available, they can take and do their experiment. In accelerators, one of the big tasks is allocation of beam time to different groups. There is always a high competition for this, and every group has to give a proposal as to why, like why you should be given the beam time, and they have to justify that proposal. There will be a initial proposal screening committee. They will look through all the proposals. So normally for an accelerator, a beam cycle is announced. That is, we are going to run the accelerator from dash date to dash date. Within that beam cycle, every collaborating group as well as external groups can apply for various slots of beam time. I want to do experiments with the beam from dash date to dash date. Once the proposals are in, the screening committee looks through them. If required, they will call the different groups who have proposed for defending their proposal. That is to make a proper presentation. After all this is done, the beam cycle, whatever timetable or beam cycle allocation table is finalized. Okay. Once that is finalized, the respective groups have their fixed slots for taking the beam. After the whole cycle is over, there will be another review meeting where all the groups, maybe after 3 to 6 months, depending on the type of accelerator which is used, they will present their preliminary results from the analysis of whatever experiment they did. This is for justifying whether they have got some good results or not. If you keep not getting any results and keep asking for beam time, you will not get. That is the bottom line of the whole thing. Okay. So uh, it takes a lot of planning, because you are operating an accelerator which has 7,000 crore rupees per year budget and 25,000 employees, and all of that is happening because you, as the leader of some experimental group, want to do a certain experiment. So basically, for that short period of time, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, whatever it is, you are basically using the outcome of those 7,000 crore rupees per year and 25,000 employees and n number of scientists. All of this is at your disposal for that short period of time. Naturally, if someone is giving you that much money and that much manpower, you are expected to produce some reasonable results. I am just pointing this out as a uh, 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 indicative thing that what kind of seriousness is attached to this beam time allocation, etc., and how competitive it can be. If someone is giving you 7,000 crore rupees per year ka one fraction, see 7,000 crore rupees per year uh, is like how much? 20 crore rupees per day, roughly. Okay. You can multiply 20 multiplied by 365 will give you around 7,000 something something, right? So 5 days beam time means 100 crore rupees investment on you, on your experiment. It's not a joke. Just for pushing through the seriousness of that, I'm just pointing it out. Okay. So these are highly competitive. Coming back to where we were, there are two experimental areas leading from the superproton synchrotron. There is also another experiment which is fed by the superproton synchrotron. If the beam is taken out from here, there is a target here which will actually produces muons, and then they decay into neutrinos. So it produces a neutrino beam. And that neutrino beam in this particular direction, this is in Switzerland and France, if you remember, CERN. There is a neutrino detector, a very large scale neutrino detector at Gran Sasso laboratory in Italy, which is several hundred kilometers away. So the neutrino beam is produced here, and that goes to the Gran Sasso laboratory, and the neutrinos are detected there. This is an example of a long baseline neutrino experiment. By long baseline, you mean you produce neutrinos somewhere and detect them somewhere else, which means that during the journey, the neutrinos have the chance to oscillate in flavor. What you mean is, if you produce 100% muon neutrino beam at CERN, by the time it reaches the other place, some of them would have turned into electron neutrinos. This is a peculiarity of neutrinos, which some of you who have done particle physics may be aware that the neutrinos have different flavor eigenstates associated with them. and these oscillate among themselves for a given energy beam of neutrinos. So the neutrino kind of experiments can also be done by sending this neutrino beam to the Italian Gran Sasso laboratory. Of course, you can also do short baseline experiments, but that is not having much meaning. The purpose of the experiment is to see the oscillations, and so the Gran Sasso thing makes sense. Okay. In fact, this was the experiment in which they in between detected something like greater than speed of light motion and all. Later on, it turned out that there was some timing problem and there is no greater than speed of light motion. It's at less than or equal to speed of light only. Okay. Then there is another branch of beamline from here which can feed the proton beam from superproton synchrotron to the LHC, which is a Large Hadron Collider, which is the largest ring they have, 27 kilometers in diameter. And of course, the superproton synchrotron from the other side can also feed the LHC in the opposite direction. So the LHC can collide two counter circulating proton beams circulating in this direction and proton beam circulating in this direction. This is achieved by actually having two separate beam tubes with their own sets of magnets, etc., which are in opposite polarity. And only at the collision area, the direction of the beam is slightly tilted so that both of them will collide with each other. Primarily, there are four experiments located along the LHC. They are called ALICE, ATLAS, LHCb, and CMS. CMS is compact muon solenoid. So all these four experiments are continuously acquiring data, and during the operation of LHC, they are continuously acquiring data, and a lot of experiments can be done. And these results actually have helped to completely establish the standard model of particle physics well beyond any other known theory. Even electromagnetic theory and Newton's law of gravity are not as well verified as the standard model of particle physics. It is because you can get so much of data with such great accuracy through these experiments. In addition, there is a low energy electron beam facility. Again, an electron LINAC, a small booster ring, and then a larger ring for further acceleration and an experimental area. This is called the CLIC facility, which is an electron beam facility. There is another LINAC which produces heavy ions. This is based on an ECR ion source. So that can either be fed through a ring acceleration into the proton synchrotron or directly through a LINAC. And all the experiments which can be done with protons can also be done with ions. Of course, only protons are used for neutron beam generation, antiproton generation, or neutrino generation, because ions don't work that way. Protons are isolated particles and their direct decays will give these results. But everything else can be done with ions, which is being done with protons. So ions, basically, their route will be go through the proton synchrotron, the superproton synchrotron, and then the LHC, and you can collide them as well. Okay, this was just a overall view of the layout of different accelerators at CERN. If this went a little heavy, then sorry, but can't help it. Okay, that is how it is. So just to give a quick overview of what kind of physics they study at CERN. Some of the efforts are dedicated to looking at early conditions in the universe. This is especially true about protons and their properties, because early universe primarily consists of a mix of quarks, gluons, and neutrinos, etc. So they try to study the quark gluon plasma. This is achieved by colliding extremely large Z ions like lead or gold. If you collide them, they are already at nuclear densities, and when you collide them together, they reach extremely high densities such that the individual identity of the nucleons is lost, and what you essentially have is a plasma. Normally, what we consider as a gas plasma is ions and electrons lose their individual identity and become one collective soup type of thing. When you collide one gold ion on another gold ion, when the nuclei collide with each other in the LHC, what happens is basically you have a mixture of quarks, gluons as a kind of jelly. They are not really having their individual identity as individual nucleons. Just as in a plasma, the individual gas atoms or molecules lose their identity and you just have a large spread of ions and electrons. In the quark gluon plasma, the individual nucleons lose their identity and you just have a mixture of quarks and gluons. So this can help to investigate what happened at very early stages of the universe. At least that is the idea. Similarly, they try to probe whether there is any physical reason for the observed matter antimatter asymmetry. We know that the universe is completely made up of matter and there is nil amount of antimatter around. So there must be some explanation for this, and that is what people are looking out for. So these are some of the ideas which people work on in CERN. Of course, standard model is more than well established, extremely well established, but there are many hints even from LHC experiments that standard model is not the complete story. It's not able to explain all the data. So people are seriously exploring what are the kind of beyond standard model theories which can be there and whether some of them will match some of the experimental results which are observed. There is a idea of trying to find supersymmetry, which is a theory in, well, it's a basically an approach in quantum mechanics, but it's a very famous theory in particle physics which extends the standard model to a new set of particles which are called supersymmetric partners of the existing standard model particles. However, none of these supersymmetric partners have ever been observed in lab. So gradually the seriousness with which people take the supersymmetry approach is gradually declining. However, it remains as a candidate which can anytime come up if we see any experimental evidence for a supersymmetric partner particle, as they are called. At present, LHC operation is closed for increasing the luminosity. The idea of increasing the luminosity is to be able to detect some of these beyond standard model processes which have very, very low cross sections. And finally, there is this exercise of doing neutrino physics along with the Gran Sasso laboratory in Italy. This is a picture gallery which gives a very interesting history of CERN. So let me take you through this. The important point to point out in this picture is that you can see that this guy, he is the chief engineer of CERN in 1950s, 1959 to be precise. You can see he is holding a bottle in his hand. That bottle was actually a bottle of vodka, which is a kind of Russian liquor. And the Russians had actually sent this bottle to CERN. And they said that you will never achieve the energy beyond what you are actually currently having. This was at the point of construction of the superproton synchrotron. The reason the Russians said that is that uh, a particular stage was reached during the cycle of acceleration where the so-called stable phase, you remember that we had talked about this concept of phase stability. That is, you need to operate the accelerator in such a way that the particle arrives not at the tip of the positive half cycle, but slightly before the positive half cycle tip. That will ensure stable transport of the beam. So there was a problem which was going to occur with the phase stability. And no one knew actually how to get over this problem. So the Russians had sent the vodka bottle with a message that whenever you manage to accelerate beyond the limit which you are trying to achieve, at that time you can open this and drink. Basically, the challenge was तुम्हारा होगा ही नहीं. You will never be able to achieve because the beam transport will no longer be stable beyond that point. However, some electronics engineers in CERN, they basically made some kind of what you call jugaad arrangement, temporary or makeshift arrangement, and they just connected it in the electronic circuitry. And when they did the acceleration went through right up to highest energy of 24 GeV without any trouble. That was because they had cleverly put a switching circuit in that makeshift arrangement, which switches the phase of the RF so that the transport of the beam remains stable and there is no beam loss. So when they achieved a lossless acceleration of this 24 GeV beam, then they actually opened the bottle of vodka and drank it. And then they put the first spectrum from the beam which they got, they put it inside the bottle and they sent it back to Russia. That is the story anyway. Okay. So that is the story behind the bottle in the guy's hands. This is John Adams, who was the chief engineer of CERN at that time. Okay. This is one interesting story. The person in the photograph which you can see is the original inventor of the device called the multi-wire proportional counter. This is basically like a proportional counter, but instead of a single wire, it has multiple wires, so that it can act as a position sensitive detector and it can track the path of the particles in a very, very accurate manner. And this revolutionized the way in which particle physics was studied, and you could get a much clearer picture of how the particles were moving and their properties could be determined. The inventor of the multi-wire proportional counter is George Charpak, and he is shown in the picture here along with the multi-wire proportional counter itself. So this was around 1968 that he developed this, and later on a Nobel Prize was awarded for that as well. Uh, in this picture, there are two physicists. On the left is Simon van der Meer and on the right is Carlo Rubbia. So they are the ones who are behind the experiment for detecting the W and Z bosons. So they managed to actually obtain this result in the superproton synchrotron, and so they were able to actually isolate this. No, actually, I think the Large Electron Positron Collider (LEP). So in the LEP, they were able to isolate this particular events, and they were also awarded the Nobel Prize at that point of time. 450 GeV electron and positron beams were able to determine that the W and Z bosons do exist, and it established the electroweak theory very firmly. This was one of the early steps in confirming the entire standard model. Later steps also confirmed the hadron part of the model, and then that was complete. Uh, Simon van der Meer is also the one who invented the stochastic cooling technology for the antiproton decelerator. So that is also there. This is a picture in 1988 when they actually dug through the tunnel for the LEP, Large Electron Positron Collider. The statistic which is given 1 centimeter, they two teams were digging the tunnel from two different sides, and they had calculated the correct path for them to approach. And when the two machines met while drilling opposite to each other, the gap between the two tunnels which were dug was just 1 centimeter off. That's all. Means they had done it very accurately. The engineering, etc., was perfect. The blue dress is one team and orange dress is the other team. So both the teams have taken this photograph together when their respective tunnels. The mismatch between the two tunnels while approaching each other was only around 1 centimeter. Means basically perfect overlap of the two tunnels which were digging from two opposite sides. Imagine this: you are digging a circular tunnel of 27 kilometers diameter, and you are coming from opposite direction, you have no clue what the other team is doing, and yet you manage to come within 1 centimeter of each other. It's a engineering achievement, and they achieved this kind of accuracy. In the 1990s, this is the first website which was developed in CERN, for giving information to people. Like you can see this, there is a home page and how to proceed and general CERN information sources, and so yeah, all these links are there. So this was the basic first website. There is something like email type of thing also somewhere. This is for communicating between the scientists in CERN. This was invented in CERN for internal purposes, and then later on it got much more popular and spread everywhere. This is 1994, an early design of the LHC where the two rings are actually slightly displaced from each other, the antiproton ring and the proton ring. Sorry, the proton ring circulating one way and the proton ring circulating the other way. And the uh, three different experiments, Alice, Atlas, and LHCb, are placed at one end and CMS is placed at the other end. In reality, as of now, they are placed at symmetrically at 4 points. So this was an early design, and they had some kind of design, and later on they improvised that while constructing the actual LHC. This is a picture in 2008 where the LHC first operations were started, and this is the control room of the LHC. You can see the crowd. Now you can come to know why there are 2,500 employees. Many of them are in the control room, and you can see the number of computer monitors which they are monitoring continuously, because various beam parameter, each person has a job. They have to watch that set of figures, vacuum, somebody will watching something else, and they have to make sure that everything is running smoothly. Otherwise, all this, remember, it is 20 crore rupees per day cost. So every moment counts, and you cannot waste anything. None of the resources can be wasted. It is very serious. And of course, some people are doing time pass, or not time pass. They were there because the operations were starting that day. Regularly, maybe there are less number of people in the control room, but still there will be quite a few trying to monitor all the parameters. In 2015, CERN announced the observation of something called a pentaquark, which is basically a bound state of 5 quarks. And pentaquark is actually 5 quarks in a bound state, not a separate binding between a hadron and a meson. That was also confirmed, I mean, to some extent. Like that, CERN keeps breaking new barriers in understanding, and keeps progressing further our understanding of these particles. Anyway, this was a history of CERN in pictures. The next accelerator which we will be looking at is the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, or RHIC. This is in the USA at the Brookhaven National Laboratory. The Brookhaven National Laboratory has been around since 1947, soon after World War II. In fact, even before that it was there, but it became a regular university center in 1947. The Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider has been operational since 2000, so 20 years now. One very important feature of this collider is that it has a spin polarized collision capability, which means that you can actually have a polarized particle collision. This simplifies the theoretical calculation and enables you to give a lot more accurate test of what is going on. One particular example for which they did a lot of work, or they're currently doing also, is to investigate the spin of the proton and spin of the neutron, for that matter. It turns out that the spin of the proton is not necessarily the summation of spins of the individual quarks. It's something more complicated. It's called the proton spin anomaly problem. And they investigate this with a polarized particle collider. They have a special type of magnet which enables the proton spin to be maintained even when it is being bent through the accelerator. This kind of magnet is called a Siberian snake magnet, primarily because it was developed in a Russian accelerator development facility in Siberia. So it is called Siberian snake. And the Siberian snake magnet basically retains the proton polarization so that you can polarize the beam. The problem with proton beam polarization is the moment it passes through a quadrupole, uh, immediately it will go into a superposition of two spin states because the quadrupole has magnetic fields in different directions. This will cause the proton beam to depolarize. The Siberian snake magnet ensures that the polarization is maintained. That is the specialty of this particular type of collider. And there is also a possibility that it will be the future site for the large electron ion collider. This is one of the things which the community, accelerator community worldwide is working on, because hadron plus lepton collisions are not at extremely high energies are not being done anywhere. So there is a large drive for establishing an electron ion collider. And the other possible site for this is at Jefferson Labs, but they are, I think they are still in a stage of deciding where it will be. And I think last I heard EIC was finalized at RIC only, but you may check this up from the websites. The beam energies which they achieve at RIC is typically around 500 GeV for protons. But the specialization, as we mentioned, is the polarized collisions, which is not possible at other facilities, and that is the specialty of RIC. The layout of RIC, again, you will see a pattern here, means every accelerator is laid out more or less the same way. Again, you can see there is a LINAC here. This is a larger picture, slightly rotated. After the LINAC, there is a small ring, which is called a booster ring. Then there is a larger ring, the alternate gradient synchrotron, which is here. And then finally, there is a beam line which takes it to the RIC, that is a relatively heavy ion collider. This is the actual layout of the RIC ring. It's the same thing as this without the shading part. So it's slightly hexagonal in appearance, which means there are straight sections where you can do experiments, and then there are curved sections where you can bend the beam. There is an electron beam ion source which is used for the LINAC. So it's a back and forth LINAC with a bending magnet at this end, comes back, goes into the booster, gets certain energy, gets injected into the AGS, goes into the booster, gains certain energy, gets, I think it must be like this, injected into the AGS, and then gets injected into the RIC. Also, directly for the AGS beam, alternate gradient synchrotron beam, you can directly transport the beam, and there is an experimental area here as well, which can be used for some other experiments. And you can see the layout of the whole facility. There are many other places which are not mentioned over here. Okay. So these are a few of the features of the RIC facility layout. As you can see, common features: ion source, LINAC, smaller ring, larger ring, and then very large ring. In CERN also there were 4 stages: booster, then proton synchrotron, then super proton synchrotron, then LHC. Here there are 3 stages: booster, AGS, and RIC. And attached to every ring, normally there will be an experimental area where beam of that energy can be used for those particular experiments. The figure at the bottom indicates how a quark gluon plasma is formed. Basically, these are 2 nuclei. They look like flat kind of thing because of relativistic length contraction along the direction of motion. So instead of 2 balls which will collide with each other, they look like 2 disks which will collide. After the collision, a lot of energy is generated, and that leads to a formation of quark gluon plasma, and that is studied in detail. So that is the first point mentioned here. Then they also they are trying to investigate the proton spin anomaly to understand what what is the contribution of the so-called valence quarks and what is the contribution of so-called C quarks in the overall magnetic moment of protons and neutrons. It's an interesting problem, very nice physics problem, and they are addressing that. It will improve our understanding of the detailed structure of the hadrons. And they are also, at the latest instance, they are also doing electron ion collisions for various purposes, primarily to study fundamental physics of different types of particle interactions. Okay. This was about RHIC, relativistic heavy ion collider. Another important accelerator facility is at Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, also called FNAL. Short form, it is called Fermi Lab. This is also in the USA. It was established in 1967. It is named after Enrico Fermi. And they got the very large accelerator called Tevatron, which goes up to 2 TeV in the 1980s. Once again, the annual budget of this accelerator is in the range of thousands of crores, 2,200 crores. Again, extremely high, which is something like 5 crore per day, kind of, if you calculate. Slightly more than that, maybe. The layout of the Fermilab accelerator facility is something like this. This picture gives you a better idea. There is a LINAC here. There is a small booster ring here. Then there is something called a recycler ring here. And then there is the main ring, which is the Tevatron, which goes at TeV energies. And beyond the Tevatron, there are several beam lines, which are for either protons or neutron beams or neutrinos, etc. In the USA also, one can have a neutrino beam generated, and that neutrino beam then goes and it is detected downstream at one of the facilities at a different location. Long baseline neutrino experiment. Okay. This is just a picture of one of the large magnets being brought by truck. So this is an actual picture, and you can see the size. It is blocking the whole road, which can take 3 or 4 cars. So this large truck and this large magnet which it is pulling, they're there to empty the road and then take the magnet. This figure is not very clear, but basically the Tevatron is a proton-antiproton collider. So you have a proton beam, you have an antiproton beam, and they are collided with each other. It turns out that the proton-proton collision cross-section and proton-antiproton collision cross-section are exactly the same at extremely high energies. That is why CERN directly decided to go for proton-proton collision rather than proton-antiproton. One of the reasons is antiproton is very difficult to make. It's not easy. Okay. This figure is not too clear, but basically you have a Cockcroft-Walton generator to start with. Then you have a small LINAC section. Then there is a booster. After the booster ring, the beam is fed into a so-called recycler ring. And from the recycler ring, either it can go straight into the antiproton source, or it can enter into the main Tevatron ring, and from the main Tevatron ring, after further acceleration, it can go for either neutrino production or meson studies, or as a proton beam for some experiments. But if you are taking it to the antiproton source, then as soon as it hits this antiproton source, you get antiprotons. Those antiprotons can then be bent back, and they can be injected into this accelerator in this direction. If the proton can be transported this way, antiproton in the same beam line can be transported the other way, and that is what happens. And the antiproton beam can be continuously accumulated here. That is why this ring is called the recycler ring. It keeps circulating the antiproton ring, antiproton bunches, while more and more antiprotons are added from here. This is a slow process because the antiproton production is a very inefficient process. Even with highly intense proton beam, you will generate few antiprotons. So this recycler keeps gathering or collecting antiprotons. Once you are convinced you have sufficient number of antiprotons to do a collision or a series of collisions, then you inject that here and you collide it with the proton beam, and you can have the collisions either at this experiment or this. There are two experiments set up where you can have proton antiproton collisions. And so once that is done, again the process starts of gathering enough antiprotons for the next round of collision, and so on. So one can have uh, multiple rounds of collisions by gathering antiprotons each time. Another view of this layout where the recycler ring is just folded on top of the main ring, just for clarity of clarity of understanding. This makes it look a little neater more than anything else. But basically the beam starts from here. The ion source, LINAC and booster are here. The booster feeds directly to the recycler ring. The recycler ring feeds protons to the main ring. Antiproton direction is not shown, but if you feed the main ring beam to an antiproton source, then that will give you a recirculation of antiprotons, which will have arrows exactly opposite to the existing arrows for protons. And that in turn will give you an antiproton beam, which will collide in the main ring with the proton beam. This is clearer from the idea of how the proton flow is going, but it doesn't show the antiproton source. The previous diagram shows the antiproton source. So with both of these, your understanding of the layout will be fairly clear. Okay. The kind of physics which people at Fermilab have looked at and are looking at, collisions of protons with different with antiprotons mainly, but also with other targets. You can generate positrons, you can generate muons, you can generate neutrinos. There was a great deal of work done on the G minus 2 value for muon. G is the gyromagnetic ratio. Normally, you know that gyromagnetic ratio for electrons, etc., is 2 according to our normal quantum mechanics. When it comes to quantum field theory, you realize that this can get corrected to 2.00 something something something. So G minus 2 should be 0 according to quantum mechanics, but slightly more than 0 according to quantum field theory, it is quantum electrodynamics. And an accurate measurement of this was done at Fermilab. And this gives you a confirmation of how good a theory is QED. So it acts as a test of QED. And the Tevatron has a 2 TeV beam, that is 1 TeV per beam of energy. I don't think it is 1 TeV center of mass. I think it is 1 TeV per beam and 2 TeV center of mass. But you can check it out. Okay. So this was the energy which was available at the Tevatron, and this was one of the early days. This was one of the machines which was doing the particle physics or standard model research before the coming of LHC in 2008. So before that, much of the standard model was uncovered, at least to some extent, by Fermilab. And CERN actually came and produced the same results with much larger yield, and so they could confirm it to much better accuracy. But the story started here for particle physics in Fermilab. Moving forward, let us have a look at a synchrotron facility. This is the Spring Gate Center of Riken in Japan. This is in a place called Hyogo. Actually, the synchrotron is built around a small mountain. You can see here a small hill. The synchrotron ring is built around that, and there is a LINAC section. So basically, it is the largest third generation synchrotron facility. By third generation, the meaning is that you have got extremely good magnet technologies, etc. A large amount of the beam can be utilized. The energies are extremely high. The light output from these facilities is extremely high. This facility, just as a statistic, in 2009, I know 2009 is a bit far off now, 12 years ago, but they had 1 lakh users per year. In 2009 is the statistics I have, but every year they get typically some number similar to this. Now, of course, the question will arise how you can have 1 lakh users because you have only 365 days in the year. They can manage this because in a synchrotron facility, the beam is not directly used for generating the photons by colliding. The beam just has to keep circulating round and round inside this, and whenever it passes through any bending magnet, it will automatically emit synchrotron radiation. Synchrotron radiation is the result of the acceleration experienced by the beam. So you just need to keep the beam bending so that it always has a centripetal acceleration, and automatically as and when it is bending, it will keep emitting radiation. So you can have radiation coming out at every point along the ring if you have beam circulating throughout the ring. So you can have multiple people at multiple places. In fact, if you can see the picture at the bottom, each window which you can see here depicts actually one experimental station along the beam, so that the beam is passing like this round and round, and one experiment here, one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, and so on. You can see for the typical size scale, these are the size of cars which are kept in front. So this is quite wide. It may not appear, but it is. Okay. So simultaneously, I can have 100 users on any given day, and all of them will be getting the beam unless the type of radiation which they need is quite different. This can be managed. And how to balance which type of radiation who needs, that the beam allocation committee will decide. That the cycles are chosen such that everyone who needs infrared or visible region will be allocated together in different portions of the beam hall. Similarly, anyone who needs hard X-ray, all of them will be allocated together, etc. And so you can have extremely large number of users. Just note this number. This was for the just expressing the idea that typical number of users a synchrotron facility can have if they do things properly. Okay. And since 1997 they have been in operation, and it's a really good facility. In fact, when I was like you in MSc Part 2, one of our professors had gone to Springate and done some experiments, and I was involved for some time in the data analysis for that. That was my first actual exposure to research level data analysis at that time. So anyway, that was just a memory. Springate synchrotron facility. One of the scientists there is an alumnus from our department, Dr. Ashish Chainani, and he might be giving a Gyan talk at some stage. Okay. Again, layout similarities. Electron source, LINAC. Once you have achieved a certain high energy, then the synchrotron keeps on circulating, increasing the energy, photon output at all the points, and you can do so many different experiments together. Just as a typical list of experiments which they carry out, one of the popular things is to have inverse Compton scattering to get very large energy gamma rays to do nuclear physics experiments. They get up to 8 GeV of gamma rays by inverse Compton scattering a laser beam, optical laser beam from the electron beam. And that 8 GeV gamma ray beam is then used for carrying out nuclear physics reactions. They also do a few particle physics experiments from time to time with the electron beam. And they had observed an indirect evidence of the Pentarcock resonance when CERN had also observed it, but it never got confirmed, or they are far too busy doing many other things. And in a synchrotron facility, you have the advantage of having a large number of users from very, very wide background. So anything from people wanting to do an XRD or XRF, or wanting to do protein studies, wanting to study some blood samples, right up to people doing hardcore physics, all will be there. So you get a very, very rich cross section of the scientific work being done. All of it requires some form of irradiation with electromagnetic radiation, that is where the synchrotron facility steps in. Okay. So a very wide, you get a very wide ranging slice of the science disciplines which can use these kind of facilities. Lot of exposure if you ever work at a synchrotron facility. All right. The next facility we are going to discuss is something called the FAIR. FAIR is an English short form. It is Facility for Antiproton and Ion Research. GSI Darmstadt has been a ion beam facility since 1960s. But the FAIR collaboration was established in 2010, and right now it is in a stage of development. It is not complete. But the completed facility aims at giving exposure of accelerators right from atomic physics and plasma physics and applied physics to um, baryon physics, that is particle physics related studies, to nuclear structure, especially nuclear structure related to astrophysics and for nuclear reactions, and a proton antiproton annihilation. All of these kind of physics they want to bring under one roof. It's a very nice plan, and as far as things go, right now it is a plan which was already before the pandemic. It was progressing very slowly, and now it has slowed down even more, but definitely a lot of work going on. GSI is already a well established facility and lot of work going on from the FAIR side. So let us have a closer look. This is the basic layout which is the plan for FAIR. The GSI original facility is given in blue, and the rest is all the additional facilities which are intended as a part of FAIR. And some of these things have been developed independently and are operating independently. For example, the beam hall for the um, cry ring, that is this one, RESR, that beam hall is already ready, and the cry ring independently is operating here with some ion beam input from somewhere else. But several of the smaller experiments, etc., are still in planning stage and they are still not built. The large booster synchrotron is not built yet. The Panda experiment, that is the high energy storage ring, is in commissioning stage, which means that it will get assembled sooner or later. It's already fabricated, many of the components. And the flare facility, that is for low energy antiproton and ion facilities. There are a lot of proposals for that, and individual components for different experiments for that are already constructed, but it has not been all brought together in one place. So various stages of development are taking place. It's a collaborative effort from various European countries as well as other countries around the world. India also has a contribution in FAIR, in fact, both from manpower and hardware viewpoint. Okay, but it's a facility still very much under construction, under development, one can say. The kind of physics which is aimed for with FAIR is very wide. By physics, I mean more or less different disciplines of science. Biophysics and material science is one of the aims. Atomic molecular physics, of course, is bread and butter thing for GSI. GSI is very commonly associated with atomic and molecular physics research. Then heavy ion physics, particularly collisions. This is again a quark gluon kind of situation which is being shown over here. Then astrophysics related atomic physics, particularly what is called laboratory astrophysics, that is laboratory measurements which support astrophysical measurements, which can help to throw light on why a particular astrophysical measurement is looking the way it is. Nuclear physics, of course, is another very common field, already one of the core fields of GSI. Then there are also some newer experiments planned, like electron scattering from different types of particles, as well as experiment based on trapping of different species. So a lot of research at individual labs has been going on trap-based physics, and all of this can come together at the FLARE facility in FAIR, which can help to bring all these under one roof. This is a basic overview of the things which are being done at FAIR. As mentioned, it is not nearly in a completion stage, but it is planned and it is going on. It's a work in progress. There are lots of works in progress. I already mentioned about the electron ion collider at BNL. In Fermilab, I omitted to mention it, but they are working on a muon accelerator, which will be 3 times the size of the Fermi existing Tevatron ring. Again, it's in a planning stage, and if you go to the Fermilab website, they have a nice animation of it, but never got much beyond that. I mean, these things take time. Even CERN, for that matter, to get permissions, etc., it took them 20, 30 years. It's not simple. Another facility we look at, one of the final ones, one more after this, is one or two more after this. This is called JPARC, which is Japan Proton Accelerator Research Complex. This is located at a place called Tokai in Japan. It's near the coast. Maximum energy of proton beam 30 GeV. However, their frontier level contribution is that they have extremely high luminosities. So they are pushing forward on the luminosity frontier rather than the energy frontier. At such high luminosities, they are able to, or they will be able to see processes which cannot be seen clearly at other accelerators because luminosities of those accelerators are smaller. So even very, very low cross section processes can be dug out because the luminosity is high. And they are also involved with these long baseline neutrino experiments with the Super Kamiokande neutrino detector. Actually, it is Super Kamioka neutrino detector experiment. That is, Kamiokande is actually Kamioka and NDE. So they are working on that as well. So you can see this is another feature. Whenever you have a proton accelerator, the first thing you try to do is do a tie-up with some nearby neutrino experiment. So your design of the layout should be such that there should be one neutrino target which has to be oriented in the direction where you want the neutrino beam to go towards the neutrino facility, neutrino detector facility. So you have to be right at the planning stage. You have to take care of a lot of multiple things. नहीं तो पूरा बांध दिया बाद में मालूम पड़ेगा नहीं कर सकता. That's not a excuse. ठीक है. This is the layout of the JPark facility. It is like a triangular kind of configuration where there are large bending sections at 3 points and straight sections. Again, same story. I'm referring the diagram on the right. There is a LINAC and there is a small proton synchrotron. Again, triangular configuration, and that feeds directly into a material science and life science facility hall, which is at the center, or it can feed into the larger synchrotron, which is a 50 GeV proton synchrotron. The smaller synchrotron is a 3 GeV proton synchrotron. And in the larger proton synchrotron, once the beam has achieved full energy, you can either dump the beam for the hadron physics in this beam hall, or you can dump it into the neutrino target, which is somewhere here, which will lead to neutrino beam going towards the Kamioka detector. So Kamioka is in this direction. This is the ocean, Pacific Ocean. So this is right next to the coast here in Japan. And here also you can see that the coast is here, and this is rotated view of the same thing. LINAC, booster, material science directly, or goes to the main accelerator. Main accelerator can dump the beam here, or it can go for neutrinos towards Kamioka. And this development took place at different times. So in 2007 or so, they were mainly up to this stage. By 2008, they had got the material science and the hadron experiments done. And by 2009, they had got the neutrino beam as well. Developments are fairly quick. They are very good technically, the Japanese, technologically also. So they are very particular about a lot of things. It's an excellent learning ground also. There are a lot of accelerated developments taking place. Much of the technology which they use is developed in house. So it's a very interesting facility. Lot of work goes on there. This is directly associated with what is called KEK, the accelerator laboratory in Japan. The next kind of or the next facility which we will be looking at is SLAC, Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. This is the place where they did the first earliest electron positron collisions to finally produce the JSI particle. Brookhaven National Laboratory, AGS, was the other one which was in that. At the same time they discovered the same particle. This is established in 1962, and at that time they had 200 employees. As of now, they have 1,400 employees and they have roughly 3,000 users per year. 2 Nobel Prizes have been awarded for various types of work done at SLAC. And another very important thing is it is an engineering marvel. It is a single building which is 3 kilometers long. It is the longest single building in the world. It's not a series of small buildings. It is one single building of 3 kilometers length. Usually, it can produce around 4 GeV electron or positron beam. Just for comparison, this is there on their website only, that if you want to achieve 4 GeV with AA batteries, then the length of the accelerator will be 4 times the moon earth distance. Only then you will achieve that much of energy, means with batteries. With the SLAC acceleration structures, it is achieved at a distance of 3 kilometers, just to point out the distinction between AC acceleration and DC acceleration. Anyway, the layout of the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center is very straightforward. There is an electron gun from which the electron beam is coming out, and there is a branch off from here which hits another target from which positrons are produced, and the positron beam can come out from here, and it can rejoin over here, so that the electron beam and the positron beam can also be recirculated continuously till you accumulate enough number of positrons, and then both positron and electron beam are injected through 2 separate tubes, and then they are collided in a tunnel over here. So this is the basic idea of the Stanford Linear Accelerator. This is the one single 3 kilometer building which you can see from end to end. That end is the collision end, I suppose. This end is the offices type of end. Oh, sorry, I think that is the collision end, and this is the LINAC source end. Offices are at the collision end. Naturally, you want to be close to the site of collisions. So the LINAC starts from here and comes straight, and then this is where the collisions takes place. It's basic layout of SLAC. And apart from the original physics, electron positron collisions, which basically broadly speaking lepton physics, which has always been their bread and butter, of late they are also trying to use it as a light source, as a basically a free electron laser kind of thing. Another interesting development which is taking place, they are looking at newer technologies for getting higher acceleration. One of these technologies is called a plasma wake field acceleration, where you have a highly energetic plasma developed, and then you dump an electron beam into it, and at the same time dump an electromagnetic wave into it, and as the plasma waves will propagate, they will accelerate the electrons further. This is the kind of idea which people have. all these are very early stages and various degrees of energy production have been achieved, but control of these processes is very difficult. So we'll be discussing some of these things: plasma wake field acceleration and plasma acceleration and wake field acceleration. When we come to advanced topics, we'll be spending at least one lecture and discussing these things. But they are working on some of these things for basically to boost the energy further from what they already have. That is the bottom line of what we want to look at here. This is just a complicated beamline which is designed for some of these kind of experiments like wake field or plasma acceleration. And some experimental setups are shown over here. All right. Another large accelerator facility which we will look at is something called DESI. DESI stands for Deutsches Electron Synchrotron, which means German electron synchrotron. And it is basically an electron synchrotron facility which gradually developed into a large particle accelerator and a photon facility. Um at present, it is there since 1959 in Hamburg, Germany, and currently it has around 1,800 employees and 600 scientists out of those, and annual budget of roughly 1,500 crore, which translates to probably around 4 or 5 crore per day, just for understanding and comparison. That is the kind of budgets on which these things operate. This is an aerial view of the DESI facility. The original DESI is here at the center somewhere. And after that, there is a larger ring which is called Doris, and an even larger ring called Hera. We'll be looking at the a better layout of this, but this is just shown where, just for comparison, you can see there is a running track and a athletic field over here. So you can see the size comparison for, and there is a football field over here, and there are some other maidans over here. So, and there is a very large, probably some kind of, again, concrete football field type of thing over here, or hockey turf maybe. So you can see the for comparison, and this is a airport type of thing. So you can see for comparison how large is the whole thing. That was the purpose of showing this picture. Okay. And much of it actually contains some jungle land also, the forest land. Okay. The actual Hera ring, which you saw in the previous diagram, is shown here, and the smaller ring, which is called the Petra ring, is shown over here, and the original DESI is actually here, this small ring. So the whole lab started with only this much of a space. They had this ring. Then they built another ring called the Doris ring. Then they built another ring called the Petra ring. And then they built this beamline called the Hera ring. And much of the things which are above the Hera ring are actually not really part of their property, but they have the accelerator running through all the region. It is underground. Okay. To have a closer look at this ring, you can see that this is here, and here we are able to see exactly how this whole thing starts. Blue arrows indicate protons, red arrows indicate electrons, and yellow arrows indicate photons. So firstly, there is the original DESI, which is an electron synchrotron. The whole name of the object is Deutsches Electron Synchrotron. So basically, there is a electron linac. There is a small booster ring over here that feeds into this DESI, and DESI accelerates things further, and that then feeds into this odd shaped or kidney shaped accelerator called Doris. Doris has a straight line here and curvatures here, then straight line here, curvatures here. So reacceleration cavities can be anywhere in this straight section. It is easy. And you can see that there are a large number of beam lines coming out from Doris. which are collectively called as HASI lab. But basically, these are all synchrotron facility sources. And the direct beam, which is indicated over here after a long straight section, there can be some kind of arrangement here to give a large boost. So you have got multiple such photon uh, beam capabilities with this Doris accelerator. Okay. Then apart from this, there is another separate building which is called the vacuum ultraviolet free electron laser, which is basically a free electron laser. And that free electron laser actually produces photon beam, and that can be studied in a beam hall which is located here, which is not shown in this diagram, by the way, on the right. But on the left diagram you can see this is a newer development. Forget that. Then you have the Deutsches electron synchrotron, DC electron synchrotron can also feed into this ring, which is called the Petra ring. Okay. In the meantime, what is happening? There is another synchrotron, which is another LINAC, which is a proton LINAC. So proton source, proton LINAC, which feeds into a ring which is almost concentric with the original DC ring, which is actually the proton synchrotron. And that proton synchrotron then feeds into the Petra ring. So on that Petra ring, you will have, with the same configurations, a proton beam circulating in one direction and electron beam circulating in opposite direction. And there is a beam hall where you can actually collide these two beams. So at the Petra energies, one can try to collide the beams and see how it turns out, what kind of results you get. Otherwise, the Petra ring can feed the electrons into the larger ring, which is called Hera ring. And the same Petra ring can also feed protons into the Hera ring. And there are 4 experimental halls on the large ring, 1, 2, 3, and 4, where you can try to do either you need not circulate both beams at the same time. You can circulate just an electron beam and study that, or you can circulate just a proton beam and study that, or you can collide the electron and proton beams and study that. All these kinds of experiments are possible with this particular facility. So just to give you a quick overview, it started with only one LINAC, one small booster, and one small electron synchrotron ring. That's all. That is the starting point of DC. It was more of a capability ke hum kar sakte hain, can we build a synchrotron or not. Then gradually, one by one, things started getting added. The Doris ring got added. Then the Petra ring got added. Then the Hera ring, after a few years, maybe a decade or so later, it get added. This VUV laser is again completely new, and so on. By the way, the Petra ring can also be used as a source of synchrotron radiation in this direction. That capability is also there. Okay, this was just an overview of this particular synchrotron facility. And they do a lot of different types of physics, electron ion collisions, the kind of things which they are trying to do with RIC, with much higher energies. These people already studied it with lower energies, electron ion collisions for verifying different parts of the standard model, molecular biology kind of experiments with photon beams. Then another type of study which they do is they do catalysis studies, means they see how a particular chemical reaction proceeds, and they can do it in a freeze frame manner by continuously taking images of this by reflecting different kinds of electromagnetic radiation from those reactants and products. So you can do stage by stage what exactly is going on with those molecules, with a X-ray, pulsed X-ray beam being bombarded and each frame being recorded separately. You can actually find out in a, like you can make a video of the molecular reaction taking place. They have done such things also, so that you know exactly what action the catalyst is performing, and then you can try to replicate it in a better manner. Then X-ray lithography for various types of semiconductors, etc. You can actually pinpointedly make the laser beam incident in such a way that you can actually etch out some channel or something which you want to write on the silicon wafer. Scattering experiments between protons and electrons or positrons, these kind of experiments are also being done. So a lot of different physics again. See, a synchrotron facility has a much wider scope always than a particle accelerator which is purpose built for a certain type of experiment. Synchrotron facility, because you have the particles plus the photons of all different energies, you have a much wider scope because you have a much wider region of applicability for your tool. Okay. With this, we just come to a quick summary of what we looked at. I leave this slide on the board for the time being. And if there are any questions at this stage, we can take them up. Please go ahead.